Picture this, 1962, a tiny school on the shores of Lake Victoria. 3 girls start laughing, and they can't stop. Welcome to the Tanganyika laughter epidemic, one of the strangest true stories in medical history. Today, I want to tell you what really happened, because the truth is far more interesting than the legend. So sit back and try not to catch anything. Here's the road ahead. We'll start with that very first giggle, then follow the outbreak as it leaps from village to village. After that, we'll rip up the funny version of the story and look at what was actually happening to these people. Then we'll ask why it happened, who told the story, and what modern science says. Finally, I'll leave you with a takeaway that's oddly relevant today. Kashasha, January 1962, a girls' boarding school on the edge of Lake Victoria, and suddenly, nobody can stop laughing. Not the girls, not the teachers, not the neighbors. Within months, around 1,000 people were caught up in it, and here's the punchline. For a long time, nobody could explain why. This wasn't a joke, it was a genuine public mystery that stumped families, governments, and doctors alike. So how does an epidemic of laughter even start? According to the accounts, it began with just 3 schoolgirls in late January 1962. One girl likely fell into a fit of nervous, anxiety-driven laughter, and it set off a chain reaction. Within moments, the girls around her were laughing too, uncontrollably. The teachers tried everything to stop it. Nothing worked. And that's when it stopped being a strange afternoon and became a crisis. For 6 weeks, the school tried to ride it out, and for 6 weeks, it kept spreading. Eventually, the staff gave up and sent everyone home. But here's the twist. Sending the girls home is exactly what spread it. As the students fanned out across the region, the laughter went with them. Suddenly, villages, families, and whole communities were caught in the same strange fit. The outbreak had escaped the school gates. Let's map this out, because the timeline is wild. It kicks off in January 1962 with that first giggle. By March, the school has closed and the girls are sent home. Through 1962 and 1963, the outbreak ripples out across the villages. At its peak, 14 schools are forced to close. And then, almost as mysteriously as it began, it just fades away, roughly 18 months to 2 years after it started. No dramatic ending, just a slow, quiet fizzle. Now the numbers, because they tell the story better than I can. Around 1,000 people were affected. That's the most commonly cited figure. 14 schools closed their doors because of it. The whole thing lasted between 18 and 24 months. And the strangest stat of all, 0 deaths. Nobody died, and everybody recovered. That's the part that makes this epidemic feel almost too weird to be true. Now, let's be honest about something. The way this story is usually told, all jolly giggling, is mostly wrong. The laughter wasn't joy, it was distress. And if we want to understand what actually happened here, we have to stop laughing at it and start taking it seriously. That's the turn our story takes now. There are 2 versions of this story. The myth, a joyful, contagious giggle fit that merrily swept through a school. Sounds almost fun, right? But the reality is much darker. The original medical reports describe weeping, panic, fainting, respiratory problems, rashes, and physical collapse. Victims described it as deeply unpleasant, not amusing. The laughter was a symptom, not the punchline. So what actually caused it? Context is everything. Tanganyika had just won independence in December 1961, barely a month before the outbreak. Traditional culture was shifting fast, and communities were under enormous pressure. Researchers argue these manias grew out of that radically changing world, stress finding a strange bodily escape. The laughter was, in a sense, the sound of a society cracking under strain. Here's a question worth asking. Whose version of this story have we been told? The early accounts were written by Western-trained psychiatrists who quickly labeled it mass hysteria. Later post-colonial critics pushed back hard, arguing those reports were condescending and blind to local social realities. They saw superior attitudes, not genuine understanding. So even the telling of this story is a story in itself, about who gets to define what's crazy. Modern science has a better name for all of this: mass psychogenic illness. It's not a germ, and it's not faking. It's real physical symptoms triggered by psychological stress. It usually starts with a single person, an index case, whose stress ignites the group around them. One person's distress can literally ripple through a community. Your brain, it turns out, can catch feelings, and that's precisely what happened on the shores of Lake Victoria. Here's the part that turns a quirky headline into a real lesson. What happened in Tanganyika wasn't a one-time fluke. It was one of several similar outbreaks around Lake Victoria, and the modern name for it is mass psychogenic illness. The trigger, again and again, is stress building up inside a close, tight-knit group. Emotions travel through communities the way sparks travel along a wire. So when a whole room suddenly catches a mood, a giggle, a panic, a cry, remember kashasha, that's the same current running through people instead of wires. Let's let the numbers sum up the whole strange story. About 1,000 people were affected, and every single one of them recovered. 14 schools had to temporarily shut their doors while the wave moved through. And the whole thing lasted somewhere between 18 and 24 months before it quietly faded out. 0 deaths, total recovery, and yet it terrified families and governments enough to sue a school. That's the punchline. What spread here wasn't a germ, it was a feeling. And that brings us to the end, and to a punchline that isn't quite a joke. Laughter is contagious, yes, but so are tears, panic, and stress. In 1962, 1,000 people caught a feeling, and no one had a virus to blame. The next time you catch yourself giggling because everyone around you is, or feeling suddenly anxious in a crowded room, spare a thought for a boarding school on the shores of Lake Victoria. Feelings move through crowds, and that's no laughing matter. Thank you.